talking contemporary Japanese watchmaking and historical factors that helped create today's players and who the main players are. And honestly, I got really carried away with Japanese history, which is totally fascinating. And I didn't really cover a whole lot of ground, but a brief bit of Japanese history. Japanese started interacting with the Westerners in 1545, and the Portuguese were traders. They included refined sugar, optics, early firearms. Part of their missionary tactics were there were missionaries also, Jesuit missionaries. So they were setting up schools and missions in Japan, and they were the first to introduce mechanical clocks to the Japanese. And they were also teaching clock making in their schools. Japanese had used water clocks since the 7th century, and traditional time measurement split daytime and nighttime into 6 equal parts. They called it temporal time, and they changed over the seasons. When they went to mechanical clocks, they would move little markers around, and they might do that every 15 days to track the changing nighttime and daytime hours. The Portuguese introduced firearms to the Japanese, and these were real early things. They weren't yet flintlocks kind of muskets. They were precursors to that. But the weaponry created all really destructive conflicts between regional players. The Japanese also embarked on some territorial conquests in the late 1590s. They tried to conquer the Korean peninsula, and that didn't go very well. And that particular period ended in 1603 with the rise of a new shogunate. And they began to consolidate power from all the regional leaders. The Christian rebellion in 1639 results in the expulsion of the Portuguese and the outlawing of Christianity. And that began their isolationist period. Travel outside of Japan is prohibited. Foreign trade is restricted to the Dutch, Koreans, Chinese, and don't know how to pronounce that. And there was one artificial island near Nagasaki, which was the only foreign trade port. Any foreigners that landed on Japanese soil outside of that one foreign port was immediately put to death. Whaling was kind of growing in that time frame, and whaling ships were active in that area. And so if you got shipwrecked and washed up ashore on Japanese soil, too bad. It's a period of peace, though, growth, strict social order, and the development of the arts. And the power of the samurai peaked at this time. Then the Edo period ended in 1868, and this restoration period begins where the emperor returns to power. During the Edo period, the emperor still existed, but it was more of a ceremonial position, not one with power. In 1844, King William of the Netherlands attempted to open Japan to more foreign trade, and his overtures were rejected. And this was actually going on since 1839. The British were trading with the Chinese during that time frame, and the British East India Corporation was importing opium into China, which became a real problem. The Chinese emperor had outlawed opium, but the British were still smuggling it in, as well as the Americans overland. And opium wars, there's a couple opium wars that happened at that point, which resulted in the British overrunning the Chinese in certain cities, and resulted in a lot of concessions from the Chinese. In 1853, U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry arrives with 4 modern warships to the Bay of Edo. Edo is now Tokyo. And he had a letter demanding the Japanese open their ports to foreign trade. The Japanese didn't want to let him land, but he basically persisted and said that he would level Edo if they didn't. The Japanese had no weaponry comparable to what the Europeans had at that time. And so they allowed him to land not in Edo, but nearby. And he delivered the letter, and he returned a year later with 8 warships for a convention. And they demanded that they sign a trade agreement, which they did because they were aware of the recent opium wars. And they were concerned that if they didn't try and choose their own destiny, that China and Britain, or I'm sorry, that the US would dictate it to them. So they signed an agreement, but it wasn't a particularly fair agreement, trade agreement, and it led to a lot of resentment. And then the rise of the modern brands. I focus mostly on Seiko, but Seiko starts in 1881 with a 21-year-old Kentaro Hattori. He opens a watch and jewelry shop in Tokyo. He had been apprenticing since the age of 13 and had worked for several different clock jewelry shops. In 1885, as trade begins to open up more, he begins to deal directly with importers for Western timepieces and machinery. And by the age of 31, he's the director of the Tokyo Clockmaker and Watchmaker Association and member of the Tokyo Chamber of Commerce. And he begins to build clocks in 1892, which roughly means House of Exquisite Workmanship. And then later in 1924, the name was changed to Seiko. In 1895, he buys a corner of a block in Ginza and constructs a building there with a 16-meter clock tower. By 1910, he's producing 93% of the domestic watches and the majority of the clocks. By 1930, he is the largest watchmaker in the world despite the 1923 earthquake. And moving on to Citizen, it was founded in 1930 as a merger between a watch manufacturing organization and the Swiss industrialist. The Europeans were importing movements into Japan and sometimes kits of parts depending on what the tariff and trade barriers were, and then cases were being made in Japan and casing these movements up. The US had a presence there primarily through Waterbury clocks and Waterbury watches. But Citizen was a joint stock company with many shareholders rather than a family-held firm like Hattori. The company is completely vertically integrated, I missed the D there, builds everything for its products, including the actual machinery that builds it. Citizen brands is Citizen, Miyota, Bulova. Underneath Bulova is Wittenauer, bunch of other brands that are of Swiss origin, and Arnold and Son, which was a historical British company that was resurrected, and that's a recent acquisition of Citizen. Stop to share here. Enough rambling. Need to admit some more people.
One of the interesting things that I had heard about is a watchmaker. Now I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, by the name of Mashido Kikuno. And I have some info up on him here. I'll send, after, I'm going to share my screen here, after which I'll share a link to a YouTube video, which you can put up on your browser and watch maybe when the meeting is over. On the topic of the temporal hour watch, here he is right here, very handsome, yep. Very handsome fellow. And the temporal hour watch has a little disc with a groove carved in it. It has a little, I don't think it's jeweled, but it has a little peg which runs in that groove. And instead of having a complex system of gears behind all this, Mr. Kikuno decided to just use a series of arms. And I'll link to these articles when I'm done. I think this is, here we go. Here's a 24-second demonstration. That groove pulls all those arms and causes the hour markers to move in their appropriate locations. And the cool thing is, if you wanted to change the time zone, he would have to swap out that little disc. He also has made some other watches. They weren't as prominent. It's really the temporal hour watch, which put him on the map. This is a very beautiful watch. This particular one has a moon phase. I don't know the name of it. Sorry, my internet's a little slow. But yeah, I love his style. It has a very independent watchmaker feel, but in a good way. It feels very original. It doesn't feel like even some of the other handmade, or maybe not handmade, but some of the other custom-made watches. I don't know what the proper term is, like Philippe Dufour, and there's another dial. But it definitely has a nice original feel, which is what I like. Very well decorated movement as well. And he has made a tourbillon, which is very impressive. And he's a cool watchmaker. I've been trying to keep up with what he's doing. Doesn't really seem to be the kind of guy who has a lot of social media presence, but he definitely has gotten some attention in around 2016, 2017. I think that temporal hour watch came out during Basel World, and in and around 2015. I could have that wrong, but for the past 5 years, he's been keeping up with the almost 3-year-long waiting list to get one of his watches, and I imagine that has just kept building. So yeah, I'll send you guys these links so you can go ahead and take a look at.
He's on YouTube. That particular, goes through his workshop. He's a very small, he's a one-man shop, and he is that particular temporal hour watch, not the gold one that I was showing, but the other steel one. That was $140,000 watch, and most of his other watches, he makes one per year. So he's a small, exceptionally small producer, a member of the AHCI, the Academy of Independent Horologists, based out of Switzerland. He's a remarkable character, what he has created. At this point, anybody have things that they want to share? Tim, he's got his hands up.
Yeah, as some of you know, my thing is the weird and the strange. One of the things that I would like to show you is, let's see here, where am I? There we are. There is, believe it or not, a knockoff. There's a Swiss knockoff of Seiko, which spells the name Saeko, and that's a Seiko Saeko watch. Happened to see that. Why in the world the Swiss would be knocking off Seiko, but apparently they were. And here's a close-up of another Seiko knockoff that has turned up. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing, that somebody would actually be copying that thing. The other thing that interests me a lot is that Seiko also, as we know, made clocks, and they still make clocks, and they make quartz clocks. And so one of the things that I have acquired over the years is a number of Seiko quartz clocks. Here's a funny looking thing I found. Let's see here. Let me get it going. It's sort of looks like a wristwatch. I don't know what you'd call that. But it turns out it is, in fact, a quartz clock with an auxiliary pendulum. The thing to me that was interesting about this is that the whole business runs on one AA. The pendulum is actuated magnetically. The battery life on this thing is almost unbelievable. It's well over 2 years, even though it's driving that pendulum somehow or other. So I'm suspecting that maybe the circuitry may have something to do with an ATO-like setup. And the other thing that I wanted to show is a desk clock that I just thought was really nifty. And this is, let me get it going. There we go. This is a desk clock, but you'll notice it also says temperature, humidity, and stuff like that. And what happens is that you press this bar and the hands rotate around, set themselves up at noon, and then the red dot hand goes to the temperature and the blue dot hand goes to the relative humidity. And as if that weren't enough, if you just let the thing sit there, the next thing that is going to happen is that the whole business rotates around, resets the hands, and then the hands go to a scale that is referred to as comfort index, which is, a calculated thing that is done with relative humidity and temperature to indicate when the room is comfortable. And then with the thing continuing to sit, why then a few seconds later, it will simply reset itself to the correct time, which, I mean, the whole thing is just fascinating as far as I'm concerned to watch, see the thing going. So anyway, that's a couple of things that I wanted to show off today.
Those are great. Those clocks are amazing.
I love how the Seiko, the Faco had the second one you showed us had the dial labeled Date-O-Matic, even though it didn't have a date. And honestly, I don't really like, quartz watches and stuff. I prefer to wear mechanical watches, but if I was going to wear a quartz watch, I would want one with that clock inside of it. Absolutely.
That's a pretty fascinating clock. I liked the animation, and I could see it being a big time sink because he'd be sitting there watching it do its thing. So that is really cool.
And I might also add that clock, that desk clock also has a battery life that is far in excess of 2 years. I mean, it's just, that's something that seems to me to be extraordinary about what they're doing, is that they're figuring out ways to get the very most out of a little AA or a couple of AA batteries.
Well, that's a lot bigger battery than you usually have in a watch, though, right?
Sure is.
Welcome, Dan. You got some interesting, sorry to delay you. I was doing a PowerPoint kind of presentation, and the damn thing filled up the whole screen, and I couldn't see any other.
My apologies for being late. Actually, I lost track of time. Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. I know that you've got some Seiko items that would be of interest to show.
Sure. Yeah, I can. I made a little PowerPoint because one of my watches is not in my hands at the moment.
Out for service.
Yeah. So I've actually only started a few years ago with Seiko. It started with this guy, which is known colloquially as a 62 MAS. It's 6217-8001, which was, perhaps the first diver that Seiko made. They made a professional diver around the same time. This is more of a skin diver, but an acquaintance of mine offered it to me, and I really didn't know much about Seiko, and I did research, and then I learned that this was very collectible. So I grabbed it because it was in really nice condition. On the lower right here is the case back. It's got this dolphin or whale, which is cool. I don't know if this has already been discussed, but one nice thing about Seiko is you can find the month and date on the back. So this is 1967 April, and so it's always that's a wonderful thing to have on the back of these Seikos. And then my brother's 50th birthday was coming up in 2019. And so at the end of 2018, I thought maybe I'll buy him a watch. And he's not a watch guy. So I said, let me get him like a really nice, robust Seiko dive watch. And so I got him one of these. This is known as a 6105. And I should say that in these reference numbers, the first 4 digits is the caliber of the movement. So this has a 6105 movement in it. This has 6217 movement in it. The last 4 digits are reference numbers, but they're often duplicated. So for example, there's a 6105 8000, which was at least for the Japanese market, and the 6105 8009 was US market. Otherwise, they're absolutely identical, but the case back indicates the specific reference. So I got him one and I sent it off, and I had it nicely serviced and waterproof for him. There's a guy who will even repack the seal in the crown, and which is not easy because it's one of those crowns that's got that washer crimped on it. So he has a way to remove that washer, repack it with a Viton O-ring, put a washer back on, passes a pressure test, and I sent it off to my brother. And then I really missed it, so I bought another one. So this is mine, and it's had the same work done to it. And here's the case back on it. It's a little harder to see, but it's a 6105 8009. It's also a US market one. And this is from, I want to say January 1970 is what that one says. And so 1 through 9 is January through September. And then it says O, N, or D for October, November, December. If you have one of those dates, I don't think I have one of those. And then, so I really started to appreciate these. By the way, these are automatic and they're not hand winding. So you cannot kind of do a pre-wind by winding them. You actually have to, they're just fully automatic. And the follow-up that Seiko made to this using the same movement, 6105, but the 8110 or 8119 is famous for that from being in the movie Apocalypse Now. And it was the first kind of hockey puck style diver that they made. It's got a much bigger cushion case than this. I really like this. It's a little, I have a pretty small wrist. But the 8110, 8119 is kind of famous, more, because that Apocalypse Now movie. I think you'll see a lot of those. Maybe we'll see one today. Who knows? Here's some more photos of the 62 MAS. I think it's just got a beautiful dial, and I wanted to show kind of how it looks in different light. It's one of my favorites.
The bezel is in really nice shape on that.
Yeah, the whole thing is in really nice shape. I was like, he offered this watch to me and he knew it was really, really special. And I was probably very ungrateful at the time because I just didn't know how desirable a watch this one is. I mean, there's virtually no mold on it. Everything is in the case is pristine. It's in really nice condition. Then I started to do a lot of research and I decided I wanted to have a Grand Seiko dress watch and a chronograph to kind of fill out my Seiko collection. And so I looked at the early Grand Seikos, and there's a thing called the first generation that are virtually impossible to find. And when you find them, they're in terrible condition, or I don't know, they're probably someone has a nice one, but they're just so hard to find. But I really like this second generation Grand Seiko. And so people probably know, but Seiko back in the 60s and maybe now also has two factories in these two different locations, Suwa and Daiko. I'm probably going to say it wrong. And in the Suwa factory, they made Grand Seiko, and in the other one, they made King Seiko. And they were sort of competing with each other, even though they were both part of Seiko. And this little logo here, this sort of double star, is the Suwa logo. And they put this lion on the back. And Grand Seiko, King Seiko, just never really caught on quite to the same extent Grand Seiko did, but they're also very high quality watches and more affordable now. So anyway, this was the second generation. I really liked it. They first came out called 43999, called the self-dater, because the date advances automatically, which doesn't seem like a big deal to us, but I guess it was a big deal at the time. They later became known sort of generically as the 57GS, because they have this, that's the name of the movement, 57 something, 99. Anyway, I don't remember, but like this first generation was called 43999, and then they became they had a more traditional reference number with the 4-digit caliber and then 4 other digits. But this is from 1964, January 1964. It's quite an early one. The one other thing I'll kind of point, this is a hand winding 35 joule movement. So go figure out where those joules are. One thing that's maybe a little hard to see, but if you look really closely where I'm pointing the arrow, it says SD. That's rare. So most of these dials will say AD. If the collectors, the real Grand Seiko collectors really want to find the SD, which is a special dial, which means the markers are solid gold instead of gold plated. So it doesn't look any different, but and I wasn't even really looking for that. I just happened to find this one. It happened to be SD, so I was happy with it just for other reasons. But I guess, sorry, there is one more thing to note about it. It says chronometer. So this is one of the last watches that Seiko made that say chronometer on them, because probably people know the history. You know, there are these observatory trials that the Swiss did, you know, that are, you know, Longines and Zenith. They were so well known for that. And then Seiko started to join in the early 60s, and then got the Swiss very mad at them because they just were, you know, like 9 out of the top 10 watches were Seikos. And so then they were disinvited from the trials by the Swiss. And for like another year, they still continued to put chronometer on the dials, and then they stopped. So you, after 64, you won't find Grand Seiko or King Seiko dials that say chronometer on them. And you know,
were these tested to chronometer standards then at the Seiko?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So there's like subtle differences with everything, but you know, like the later ones had sort of a plain back that just says GS instead of the lion. So I really like these early ones because, you know, it still has this little logo and it says chronometer. It's got the lion on the back. I think these are really nice to look for if you're interested in Grand Seiko. This one came with the buckle, which people care about. I'm not really a buckle person. And then the last one I wanted was a chronograph. And they're really, obviously, you know, as Tim knows, we've seen his Pogue. They're really famous for those being one of the first auto winding chronographs. But, you know, I looked at them and I couldn't decide which one I wanted. And then I found these old hand winding chronographs and I just love them. And so I had to get, I decided this is what I wanted. So these are the first chronographs that Seiko made. 1964, they made them for to coincide with the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. And this was the first generation. They were later known as 5719 8001 and 5717 8001. They came with both these sort of black dial and silver dials. But the first generation had this different reference, 45899. And they came with these Bakelite bezels that are almost always broken. And so when you look for these, you'll usually find them with replacement bezels that are like aluminum inserts or a solid steel bezel. They're two different variants. But you know, this one, you can see a lot of wear on it, but the Bakelite bezel is still there. So that was one thing I really liked about it. The other thing that's nice to find, although mine doesn't have it, is a good case back. You can barely see the Olympic torch in the center. These are very shallowly engraved. Oh, actually, this is December. This is 1964 D December. So you can kind of see how sometimes that second digit is not a digit. But you know, obviously it's desirable to have that case back in a little better condition, but it's really hard to find. It's a mono pusher, column wheel, chronograph. Sorry, I didn't think to take a photo of the inside. Yeah, hand winding, column wheel, chronograph, nice size, like 37 millimeters. I should have, or 38, something like that. I should have said actually these are pretty large also, 37 millimeter for a dress watch from the 60s, pretty good size. So yeah, so that's my little Seiko collection, and this one is actually off being serviced because I got it last year. It has a mainspring issue. It doesn't hold much of a charge, but it's not going to be an issue. It's just taking a while.
So are you getting that serviced in Fort Collins, or?
No, so Spencer, is still not really taking on work, at least not for me. Maybe for people who he's worked with for a long time. I sent this to someone I know in Australia, who's also the same person who serviced those dive watches for me. His name is Adrian Selleck at Vintage Time Australia. He's a Seiko specialist.
Well, anybody who's good at watchmaking is pretty damn busy. So
yeah, they probably are.
So I'm going to ask Anthony, you want to make some comments on there? I've got your website up here, which is on the chronometry trials. So you know a lot about that.
Yeah, read through the article is probably the easiest way to do it than go through the whole history. First, yeah, Dan, really nice bunch of watches there. Yeah, the 62 mass, really good condition. It's nice to see because, yeah, as you know, lots of fairly average condition these days. Just a couple of quick comments. The star dial on the 57GS, the marking on the dial, is actually the indicator for an SD dial. Okay. Yeah, so, thanks for that. And then an AD dial, you'll see it'll actually have like a triangle and an inverted triangle star on top of that, just a little different logos. The Sewer and Dynie logos are a bit different. So the Sewer has a logo that looks sort of like the, I don't know,
oh, it's like
you
this.
see on a hurricane, yeah, like it's a swirl type symbol. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, it's
exactly.
Like
yeah.
That. Yeah.
So yeah, each of the different companies have a different logo that you often see on the dials. But if it's an SD or an AD dial, that's generally replaced with those logos. So a bit different there. But yeah, on the case back, it normally also shows the company logo as well. Yeah, the 57GS, yeah, like I said, really nice looking model there as well. The chronometer standards, as you mentioned, yeah, Seiko moved away from just branding chronometer on those, but they introduced their own standards. So for Grand Seiko, there's a Grand Seiko standard that essentially followed along fairly similar to the Swiss chronometer standards, where they did their own in a lot of general areas. They sort of exceed those specs, but as you know, as time went on, Swiss updated their standards as well for different types of specifications that improved over time, and Seiko followed along as well. So, you know, a 1960s standard is less strict than it is today. So that changes as it goes on today. Seiko still do their own internal standards and testing. Generally, the changes is they'll measure it in more positions or over a longer period of time and things, but very similar sort of comparison between the different specs between those. The two different two different companies that produce the products still continue today. So Sewer is these days under Epson, and Dynie is now referred to as Seiko Instruments or SII. And yeah, they continue on. The mechanical pieces from Grand Seiko come out of the SII side, and quartz and spring drive models come from the Epson side of the company. Yeah, the one button, the crown chronograph mono pusher there is, yeah, really nice. The Bakelite bezels, as you said, are quite often broken, but there is a couple of other models. The steel bezels are also factory original, so they're not all replacements. Quite often if people broke them, yeah, they did get replaced with those. But yeah, just because you have a steel bezel doesn't necessarily mean it's a replacement.
Right.
Yeah, there's a few different, as you said, there's this solid steel bezel and then also the ones with the inserts that you get The inserts probably are a little rarer than the straight steels. Yeah, quartz competition trials there. As you mentioned, starts back in the 60s. Seiko joins. First one to join was actually Sewer from memory. Goes through different ranges. There was a whole bunch of different categories. So you see there was portable clocks, marine chronometers, deck chronometers, all the way up to, or down to, I guess, wristwatches. Depending on what year you're looking at, they entered different devices. So the first one starts off with the new crystal chronometer, which was designed for the 1964 Olympics, and then was later sold as a marine chronometer, which you can see there, the 951. That was entered in the competitions, and really was one of the main timekeepers for the 1964 Olympics. So it's a portable unit. I've got a couple kicking around somewhere. So I can probably run out and grab one later on. But yeah, nice thing there. As they continued on, they entered more of the different categories, and initially started off, well, quite poorly actually, but then improved fairly quickly over time as they go through the different years. So yeah, you can see the results there. And yeah, the different settings they go for. You see the smaller portable deck chronometers. Really the categories is just due to size of the units. So they change a bit there over the years. When they entered into the wristwatch sections a couple of years later, initially the results were quite poor, but then definitely improved as they go on.
Yes, here in 19...
That's
yeah, 1967. There, they pretty much they took all the top slots.
Yeah, in those small pocket areas there. So yeah, they're larger than a watch. Yeah, then when you start looking at the wrist chronometer, as you can see, CEH obviously dominates that area. But yeah, the only other one really competing is Sewer in that. So a couple of years later, they of course released the Astron. So yeah, they were heading down that route fairly quickly, probably all driven from the initial development that they put towards the 64 Olympics, which was a huge driver for the company.
The 64 Olympics really kind of changed Seiko in terms of sports timing. You know, from what I read, Hattori sent one of his chief guys to Rome with the orders in 1960 with the orders to see how they did timing, because we're going to do the 64 Olympics. And within 2 years, they had an international class pocket watch split second timers that they were using in international competition. And by 1964, they had the world's first printing photo finish timer, which got put to use on a women's hurdling event where the top three the first three winners came, you know, apparently virtually identical, and this slit scan camera with overlaid thousands or hundreds of a second times on it determined who was the winner there. And that was the first time that the Olympics used hundredth of a second resolution for finishes, and the first time a photo finish was used to determine the gold, silver, and bronze medalists.
Yeah, so 64 Olympics was definitely huge for the company. They really didn't have a history of sports timing before that, and developed, you know, a whole range of different recording instruments for the games. So their lack of experience obviously was a hurdle. They had to produce a lot in a very short amount of time, but it might have actually helped them because they weren't coming from any preconceived ideas. So it really allowed them to look at what the issues were with sports timing at the point, and then come up with solutions for those, which were sort of definitely outside the box because they're not coming from a traditional background. Actually, on the site there, yeah, there's also an article on the 89 ST, which was their stopwatch series that they developed for the 64 Olympics. There was 3 different models, a 1/5 of a second, a 1/10 of a second, and a 100th of a second model. But when they started investigating, the first thing they found was there was issues and inconsistencies between recording on the stopwatches. And the general consensus at the time was, well, it's the way that operators are working the stopwatches. So people needed to be trained officially, and they would have dozens sometimes of people operating stopwatches to get an accurate time, and then they would average between each of the different results. What they actually found when Seiko started looking at it is, even when they put a whole bunch of contemporary stopwatches into a machine that started and stopped them at exactly the same point in time, they were giving different results. So it really wasn't specifically the operator's fault. It was down to blind luck, actually, a lot of times, as far as who was getting supposedly close to the starting and stopping correct times. The main reason they found out was the starting point of the balance. So when it starts off, depending on where in the swing the balance was, would change the amount of the initial kick that the watch was given. So Seiko implemented a heart-shaped cam into the system. So when you start and stop, it always starts and stops at exactly the same point in the rotation. So that way it's always a predictable start and stop. It also allows you to stop exactly onto a marker point instead of somewhere in between the indications on a dial. So yeah, that significantly helped. And then those are the watches that they took over to Europe. They looked at that. The Olympic Committee looked at the watches and said, yep, these are good enough to work for the Olympics. In fact, these are some of the best stopwatches we've seen. We're going to award Seiko the rights for the timing of the 64 games. And they then went back and realized, okay, we have to build a lot of stuff, not just the stopwatches that we've done, but also a whole bunch of different timing things. And yeah, the 64 Olympics ended up being the first ones with digital timing and quartz timing there. And Seiko obviously has a huge sports timing company that's evolved out of that continues on today.
So do you see many Seiko stopwatches out there? I don't think I've ever seen one.
Yeah, I mean, they're quite common. There's not too many other companies that produce regular stopwatches these days. So yeah, Seiko's probably one of the most common as far as physical stopwatches, standalone timing systems you get today. The older style ones are also quite common. The original stopwatches from the Olympics and onwards are also relatively easy to pick up. You see them in the auctions and things for sale quite often. Probably the rarest model of those would be the 1/100th of a second. It's an interesting model. It records up to 10 minutes. But being 100th of a second, it's actually operating at 360,000 BPH. So yeah, the noise you hear out of it is an interesting kind of high-pitched buzz. It's an interesting movement to watch and see how it operates.
So in terms of your website, is there any pages here that I should bring up that you wanted to?
If you're looking at sports timing, if you
Well,
search
I'm
for the
looking
89
at
ST.
I'm looking at your home page now.
Right. Okay. All right. Hopefully people can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Excellent. So yeah, the 89 ST. Oh yeah, they're also split chronographs, so you can record interval times when you operate those. So I'll just quickly run a thing. The 1/5 and 1/10 are very similar operation. Obviously, just the timing accuracy that you get between those. So you can see your start and stop catches up, and away you go. So fairly standard design and operation. You start and stop, reset with the top button there. The 1/100th is a little different. It is just a single button. It's not a split thing. As you can see, you've got the hundredths around the outside, the seconds on the smaller subdial, and then in the center there, the minute counter that's available. I think further down, I've got some, there's the movements itself. As you can see, a very large bridge on those. The hands on the stopwatches as well are also all angled to drop down, so you don't get parallax error when you're reading the time off the dials there. So yeah, quite an unusual hand design. Okay, bunch of different things. Blah, blah. The stopwatches were actually used all the way up until the Sapporo Games in '72. They were in fact the last time that a mechanical stopwatch was used at the Olympics. At those Olympics, it was all electronic timing, but the mechanical ones were used as a backup stopwatch. So not generally used because the electronic timing was used for everything, but it was the last time they were actually used there. There's the different movements between each of those. All look very similar, of course. The easiest way to tell them apart is the size of the balance. You know, instantly spot on the 1/100th of a second, just because of the speed that it's running at and centrifugal forces and things. The balance is much smaller on the 1/100th of a second. All right. Yeah. It's a bit hard to see there.
Yeah, it's going so fast you can't really see it.
Can't really see it. Even at when you're running it at a tenth speed, it is very difficult to see because at 1/10 speed it's still at 36,000. So a regular high beat type movement. So
yeah, you got to hit play down there.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yep. You can
Even
see
at
the
1/10 of a second, yeah, you can see it there. It's very unusual. Yeah, very distinctive sound and stuff on those as well. So if you listen to the videos, it's probably the easiest way. Check it out later. So yeah, they're quite interesting. Yeah, Seiko obviously has continuing, as I said, sports timing section as well as, well, as a group, they're very, very large. As others have mentioned, they do clocks. There's a whole clock company. There's obviously watches is a huge thing. Sports timing. They also have industrial timers and large, clocks more for corporate squares and building installations and, town clocks,
basically
that type of barrel. Yeah.
Public time kinds of clocks,
yeah,
as we would
exactly,
call
all
them.
those sort of ones. And yeah, a whole range of other things associated with those. So, GPS syncing on all that sort of stuff. And yeah, a whole range of other timing devices and things. But yeah, a very large group of companies in the Seiko area there.
The finish work on the bridges are very nice for the stopwatches. You compare that to the Swiss models like Minerva was using, which was a standard model, and they are just very, unimpressive looking, but the double-footed balance bridge is nice.
Yeah, they're quite nice general designs, and you can pick them up fairly cheaply these days. There's quite a lot of them. They produce them for quite a few years, not just for the Olympics. They were available for general sale to the public as well. So yeah, they're not particularly hard to find, but yeah, an interesting little split setting. So yeah, it's good.
You have a lot of nice material on your website. Is this something that you've been buying, or are you able to find public sources for this kind of documentation?
Yeah, and so catalogs and things, I've got a few of them. They fill up the bookcase behind me there. So yeah, I've got most of the catalogs from, well, pretty much every one of the catalogs produced from the first ones back in early or mid 60s up until 2019 is the last one I've got. I don't have a 2020 catalog. So I've got, yeah, Seiko, Citizen, there's some Creedor stuff, Alba, but yeah, a whole range of things. So documentation for catalogs and things isn't too hard to find. Things like service manuals and all that sort of stuff, again, is relatively easy to find. It's one advantage of Seiko, because they are such a huge company. There is so much documentation that's been produced. And then they also have a lot of internal documents as well that are available. So there's, you know, all the internal dealer news issues and that type of documentation is also available. So it's, you know, it takes a while to track it down, but it's not impossible to find, unlike a lot of other companies where you just can't get any details and you're always wondering what's actually, you know, what is a real version of something. And, you know, at least this is fairly easy. You can look back and find stuff in catalogs and confirm what is original and what isn't. And again, as Dan also mentioned, with Seiko, the markings on the cases are quite easy to understand as well. So that definitely helps for collectors to understand what it is. So, you know, if you look on the back and there's those two groups of numbers, the first one's the movement. You know, if the case has a different movement inside it, you know, there's something definitely wrong with the watch. So you can easily tell the movement. And then that second number is the actual case number. So yeah, that tells you the design of the case. Because it's relating to the case, you know, you can have different dials and things inside those cases, because quite often, say, they'll produce a black dial and a blue dial. So the case number will be the same, but the dial numbers will actually be different. The dials themselves also have codes on them, which are easy to understand as well.
I'm sure it gets to be an interesting, what I want to call investigative thing to figure out if you've got a correct watch in terms of looking at dial numbers and the movement, calibers and case numbering and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's something that's getting a little harder. You're seeing a lot more fake dials and things starting to turn up, and just Franken watches with random pieces stuck into them. Yeah, you're seeing a lot more popularity with Seiko, and as that increases, so is the amount of just rubbish coming onto the market. So luckily, though, it is relatively well documented. So yeah, it's not too hard to understand what you're doing with a bit of research.
I think with the dating on the watches, the challenge I have is the decade, because some of the watches like the World Timer, which came out in '64 for the Olympics, you know, that has been produced for a long time. So you never quite know which decade you've got. Yeah,
most of the time it's fairly rare for calibers to stretch across decades. So for a caliber to produce more than 10 years. So as long as you know what the starting year of that caliber is, most calibers you're okay with. There is a few that have, you know, run longer than a decade, but quite often there's revisions in those as well. So generally the method that they use to differentiate those is just they number them, you know, 123A, 123B, 123C, as each of the revisions go on. And those are generally updates to the movement to change parts or internal components as they go.
You know, here is my World Timer, and so it's got a black dial on it. Bring it over. Can't get the
bracelet out of the way.
Yeah, can't get the bracelet out of the way. So, but anyway, I think this one I'm guessing is later than, I was assuming it was a 70s rather than a 60s.
Yeah, I think so.
Can you get a close up of the dial for us?
Yeah, I don't know if the camera will remain
good
in focus.
Not quite that much.
You need to share. So Tim, you didn't warn me we had an expert on the call today before I started giving all my garbled explanations about that Seiko history.
No, it all made perfect sense. It's all good.
A little dangerous, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
While we're looking at that, I just want to compliment having our expert on. It's been very
really impressive.
That's good.
So
nice piece.
Anyway, so actually down there, that little logo there, that is that's what Dan was talking about.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Right on the edge of the camera's ability to focus.
Yeah. So that swirl type mark is the sewer marking, and then for the Dyne models, you'll see like a lightning bolt symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Sua became Epson, is that correct?
Yeah. So So, yeah, history of that's a little difficult to explain quickly, but there was a separate company that was established to create parts as a parts supplier, and they were located in the Sewer region. And then when the war started happening and there was bombings and things in Tokyo, the Daini factory was potentially going to be damaged, so they moved some staff to the Sewer facility. That was actually it's a separate company, but it was owned and controlled by the Hattori family at that time, so another family company within the Hattori group. So they set up some watch production and things for the factory there. There was also some production during the war. They made some timed ordnance parts and a range of other devices, but generally it was just timekeeping devices. After the war, they continued on with that factory. So there was actually Daini employees there at the time. And then later on, the company was separated out. So it became Sewer Sakosha. And then that eventually turned into Epson. So it was run as a separate company, but because of the timing devices and things that they produced for the Olympics, as mentioned before, they introduced for the '64 Olympics also a small portable printing device that could print out the recorded times. That printing device was really industry leading at the time. It was much, much smaller and more efficient than anything else in the printing area. So that was commercialized as a printer, a standalone printing device, which then evolved over time into Epson, which we know of now as a large company that does a whole bunch of printers as well as a whole range of other different products. Mm-hmm. So the sports timing is how they ended up Epson getting into the printing game. So
okay, here's an Epson product.
Yeah.
Oops. I hit a power switch that accidentally shut off my camera interface, but the Epson RD1 digital camera, which came out in the early 2000s, rangefinder camera with a Sony imager. And the most interesting part here is where I'm pointing. That's a Seiko quartz watch movement that they've repurposed as a function indicator on the camera. And the lens on that is not a Seiko lens. They didn't make lenses per se, although they did own Tokyo Optical, which made aerial camera stuff. So this is a marine chronometer, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of these devices.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of those around, but yeah, I don't actually have any of those.
And they were copied after the Ulysses Narden movement, which they imported into Japan prior to the war. And then so there are about 500 of these made in their factory over about a 2-year period before it got bombed out. Mine has got some issues with it. Second hand is broken and the balance pivot is broken.
So when do you think that's from, Tim?
I can tell you got to find the section. I've got to switch my camera too. It'll take a little bit to reboot. So I've picked up this book, which is kind of it's a small book on industrial kinds of things. And in the marine chronometer world, they disorganized. This would have been prior to the war. This would have been, I thought, in the late 30s or early 40s when they did it. And the gentleman that actually led the development of this particular chronometer was the same gentleman that led the development of the Olympic mechanical watch effort. He eventually went on to the board of directors, and fortunately, I'm fairly disorganized for this meeting with actual details. I think that
You see those in like gimbal mounts sometimes, or how were they?
it was in a wood box. Yes, it was
Just a box,
gimbal.
but not in a gimbal mount. Just sort of like more like a deck chronometer, or
It's exactly, generally deck chronometers are smaller and they may or may not be gimbaled, but these larger marine chronometers were pretty much always gimbaled.
Okay.
This particular chronometer has a brake circuit in it, as they call it, which is nothing more than they had an added wheel on the escape wheel that had bumps on it, and then they had a switch mechanism, and so you'd get a contact closure every time a bump went by, and they could either be every second, half second, or you could select the shape of the switch cam that you put in the chronometer for whatever it was you were trying to time.
Roughly, what's the size of the dial on yours there? For scale, we couldn't tell the scale.
This particular these chronometers are about 4.5 inch diameter dials.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 4-inch diameter. So had another question for Anthony about the wristwatches for the '64 Olympics. The watch that Dan showed was a mono pusher, but they had a really rare lap timing or lap counting watch as well that had 4 buttons on it.
Yes, it's the 5718. Similar sort of general basis of the watch as compared to the 5717. But yeah, it also has a counter that sits at the top of the thing. Looks like maybe a big date window. And you can operate those from a couple of buttons on the left-hand side of the case. So it'll actually count up to 99. The interesting thing is it's also tied into the movement. So if you set it as a date, every 24 hours, it will actually advance the counter by 1 as well. So you can use it as a big date if you want to.
Wow.
Probably a bit unusual for most people's uses. But yeah, it was used to count laps, or I suppose you could use it to count points or anything else as well. But yeah, just independent up-down adjustment on the timing there from the buttons on the side of the case. They were sold to the public, but they were only sold through the store at the Olympic on the actual site. So yeah, relatively rare, not too many of them made, but yeah, there's a black and a silver dial version of those available. Yeah, quite nice if you can manage to pick one up, but they're generally not particularly cheap these days.
I was doing research on that particular, well, on these 64 Olympic watches, and they've reissued a 3-hand time-only version, but that 4-button counter wristwatch, I mean, those things are well over $10,000 US at auction.
Yeah, if you see one for $10,000, just don't hesitate to buy it. Quite happily triple your money if it's in decent condition.
That's a pretty incredible.
Very sought after watches in Japan, and now also internationally as more people become aware of those. But yeah, even for an average condition one, you're looking at least 20 grand these days.
Anthony, you got anything you want to bring out on Citizen?
Yeah, I mean, the Citizen Belova connection, yeah, is obviously fairly well documented. For Citizen's electronic watches, they licensed some movements off them as well. So yeah, you'll see that essentially happening in the opposite direction. And yeah, these days, of course, they're a separate brand owned now totally by Citizen. Citizen is, as you said, one of the largest watch brands in the world these days. Have a whole bunch of things. Really, their OEM movement side of the business is massive, and supply people across the world with a whole bunch of stuff. Miyota stuff is definitely commonly used in a whole range of different products, and yeah, they OEM those to all sorts of companies. So very established brand there. Seiko, of course, do OEM brand product as well. They have a separate company that manages their movements and things for distribution. But yeah, quite common. You're seeing Japanese stuff turning up in a whole range of things. Casio's obviously another huge company, obviously focused on quartz and stuff there. You don't really see too many mechanical Casios. In fact, don't know if they ever produced any. But yeah, definitely another force to be reckoned with in the watch industry in general.
The Citizen, they own Orient Watch as well, I believe.
No, Orient's actually owned by Epson.
Epson, okay, so that's under the Seiko.
No, that's under Epson.
Well, it's under Epson, but Seiko owns Epson, right?
No, Seiko doesn't own Epson.
Wow, okay. For some reason, I thought that
it's a very complex kind of relationship. But on a financial level, Seiko Holdings, which controls all their marketing, sales, and SII, and a whole bunch of other companies. Seiko Holdings owns a small percentage of stock of Seiko Epson, but both companies were founded from the Hattori family and essentially can be considered part of the Seiko group. But financially, there is very little connection between those. But they both come from the same group of companies. So yeah, definitely incredibly tied to each other, been supplying each other for many, many years, but Epson isn't, financially part of Seiko Holding, even though they are a supplier. Because they both are owned and controlled by Hattori family, can sort of think of them as the same company. But from a legal point of view, no, they're not the same company. But yeah, incredibly close tie.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I just sort of see them as, like under the same umbrella. So I just say, well, it's Seiko, but obviously that's not the case.
No, Orient is totally separate, so not involved with Seiko marketing, Seiko watch in any way. So definitely controlled and handled separately there. You'll see now that all the Orient pieces have just Epson branding on them. Yeah, that's the way they're moving. And Epson also make a few other different types of watch brands. So they have a series of e-ink type watches that they sell as well under another brand. And yeah, they also make models similar to the Quartz Astron GPS models under the Trume brand, so TRUME. But again, yeah, that's a separate Epson group.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Citizen dive watches, because they were one of the early pioneers. I was going to share a camera again. So I got here a Citizen water pressure tester, and I don't know what era this thing is from, but it's a real monstrous piece of aluminum machining. Get the giant lid off. So you had an insanely thick, heavy aluminum body and a small crank out here that would move a piston in and out. And I had a Bulov Accutron dive watch that I had a local guy service for me, Bruno, which some of us local guys know. And then I immediately put it in this thing and pumped it down and managed to flood it by exceeding the waterproof limits of it. But anyway, Citizen did a number of dive watches. And anybody have any of these in their collection?
Yeah, I've got a few, none instantly on hand. But yeah, they mechanical dive watches, quite sought after, mainly in Japan. There's not as much information on those as you see on the Seikos, but yeah, we're quite popular. Still make mechanical dive watches and things there that sort of compete quite happily with Seiko on a lot of levels. And then these days, obviously their main focus is on eco drive. So there's lots of dive watches there. So yeah, quite big, chunky watches. That isn't really going to focus there. But yeah, you see those, a whole bunch of depth gauges and all those sort of things built into those. Quite common these days. Yeah, if you're looking for a high-end solar-powered dive watch, then yeah, can't really go too wrong with Citizen. Yeah, Eco Drive's great. Definitely my preference. If you're looking for solar, then yeah, Citizen seems to be probably the leader there.
Sounds good. Let's do some sharing. What else do people have to show off in their collection? Anybody want to show something? Okay, Sean.
Hey.
You're munching away.
Having a little lunch, but yeah, I had one thing I just wanted to show off. I think a few months ago I showed you guys the Pogue that I had bought, which was kind of my first foray into Seikos, which I've really been happy with. And then the next one I wanted, after seeing Dan's 6105, 8009, is that the one that yours is?
Yeah, that's one I have. Yeah.
After seeing that, last winter or last spring, I kind of started to look for those, and I really kind of like the 6105 8110s, the ones that you were talking about, Dan, that were in Apocalypse Now. Mm-hmm. I tried for a few months, probably toward the beginning of all the lockdowns and stuff, just to pick one of those up off of eBay, kind of like an honest original one that didn't have too much mold and that wasn't, too polished out or beaten up on the bezel and stuff. And I wasn't really willing to go over, like $1,000 or something like that was what I kind of had to spend. And they kept going for like 1,100 and, like just over 1,000 and stuff. So I could never really bring myself to buy one. And so I decided, I'll start with something sort of smaller with the sort of less of an initial investment. And I remember my roommate in college, he always did the Seiko mods. That was like his thing he was really into. And at the time I was only into like antique pocket watches and World War I watches and stuff like that. So I didn't really appreciate kind of what he was doing. And we were talking recently and I said, that's what I'll do. I'll buy like an inexpensive modern Seiko dive watch, and I'll just do a couple little mods on it to just kind of make it my own. And so I bought I'll take it off, and I've got some photos too. I'll share my screen. I bought a SKX 007, or I started looking at those because those are, I think, they're still pretty readily available. I don't know if they're still considered current or not, but you can still buy them, new, and they're anywhere from like, $150 to $300 depending on the condition. And I discovered you could also buy the 007J, which is the Japanese market one only, and they're almost identical, except for the only difference between them is that the Japanese domestic market one says 21 joules under the diver's 200 meter versus the other one. So they're virtually identical, and I think you pay like the $20 price premium for the JDM one versus the American market one. So I went ahead and I bought just I did buy the JDM one, and then I started looking at like mods that I wanted to do to it, and people just go wild with these things. And there are like a million YouTube videos that you can watch, and a bunch of sites that people really get into it, and they do, they put on ceramic bezels and they put on different dials and different handsets. Some people upgrade the movements, all sorts of crazy stuff. So I actually kind of like the original one. So I didn't want to do anything too drastic, but what I decided was I didn't really like the hands. They're chrome, and they don't feel right with all of the kind of like the rest of the matte surfaces that you have on here. So I said, okay, well, what's a good sort of design to go for? And I decided I would try and do just a black hour hand to match the seconds hand, which is black, white, with the white painted stick on it. And then an orange minute hand, which a lot of like vintage dive watches have, that the prominent orange minute hand. So I went on, and there's a company called NAWCC, which a lot of these YouTube videos and stuff, they kind of point you towards this site. They make a lot of aftermarket things. You can buy like new cases, new dials, new crystals, new everything. They sell for $10. You can buy 1 hour hand, either a red, a blue, or an orange. And then you can also buy the different like full sets with just the gloss black hands. And then they've got all sorts of different other ones too, skeletonized, different colors, gold, Mercedes, and stuff like that. But I wanted to just kind of like do a subtle mod. So I bought those two, and I went ahead and I just, I mean, it was one of those things. I just watched a YouTube video on like a guy who just showed, his preferred way of opening it and pulling out the tension ring and getting the movement out and stuff like that, and how to, which button specifically pulls the crown out and stuff like that. So I took it apart and then, put the new hands on it, and then put it all back together, and that's basically what it looks like. I was pretty happy with the result, to be honest. It's like the orange matches. It's not the exact same orange as the Diver 200, but it's pretty close. And then the black hour hand now matches the original seconds hand a little bit better. And the loom is actually pretty darn good on them. It seems to be just as good as the original ones. So there's really no difference there. It's a subtle thing, but it's something that kind of makes it mine now. And this was, I think, all told, I spent, for a brand new watch, I think I paid $220 $20 or something off of eBay. And then the hands cost another, $30 plus shipping and stuff. And then the other thing that I did was the band that it comes on, the rubber band is fine. It's okay. It's one of those kind of like expansion-y kind of types of bands. If I can find a photo of the original there. So if you just go on eBay, this is like the band that it comes on, and it's fine. And I think functionally, if I was doing a lot of scuba diving and stuff, it would make sense because it's got these expansion, kind of like ruffles in it and stuff, but it's just a little too bulky. And so the other thing that I did to kind of make it mine was instead of changing out the band, going back to what would have been on one of the 6105 8110s, the waffle strap that they would have come on. So Uncle Seiko is another place that you can get a lot of aftermarket Seiko stuff. So I bought one of his 22 millimeter waffle straps, and so it kind of kicks the wearability up in my mind a little bit. It's not quite as invasive, and it sort of harkens back to the original one that I was ultimately trying to buy, but decided, maybe I'll hold off. And unfortunately, the prices have only continued to go up on the 8110s as the pandemic has gone on. I mean, like most watches. But yeah, so that was my little project with my SKX 007, and it runs really well, and you don't really have to think about it. And again, I bought it brand new, but the sunk costs in it, there's a lot. I've gotten a lot of value and enjoyment out of something that actually didn't cost me all that much. And then I can wear it around too, and I don't have to worry about hitting it on stuff and banging it around. And when the pandemic is over and my wife and I can actually take vacation, then it'll be if we go to Hawaii or something like that, then it'll be the one that I take and actually take out in the water and try and attach some memories to. So yeah, that was the one thing I wanted to share. That was my little Seiko mod thing. And I don't know if I subscribe fully to the Seiko mod sort of culture, but I like it, I guess, in principle. And I think it is sort of a fun thing to do if you want a little kind of like a little weekend project. So, and the possibilities are endless. The amount of parts they offer is just outrageous.
So Sean, you probably know, the successor to the 6105 was that 6309, 7001 or whatever, is very similar stylistically to the 6105 that you were interested in. And I think they started maybe in the late 70s but they made them for a long time, and still quite a bit more affordable than the 6105, but probably going up just like on the same trajectory. You'd probably, like at first glance, it looks very, very similar to the 6105 8110 that you were interested in. That might be something to consider.
Yeah, I looked at those for a while too, and I think it was one of those things too where I was having trouble finding one that wasn't just like completely destroyed.
Yeah, well, that's true.
For like a decent price.
That's collecting watches.
I know. So yeah, my patience was wearing thin. So
yeah.
But I guess they recently came out with kind of a spiritual successor to the 8110 that you can buy new, and I think it's they refer to it as the new Captain Willard or something like that. So it's a little bit smaller and it's not exactly the same, but it has that somewhat kind of odd turtle shaped offset crown stuff. Right. So I thought I might go and get one of those too, but the same thing, it's like they're right at that $1,000 threshold. And I thought, well, if I really like the 007, then I'll jump up and try and get something. I still keep an eye out. I still keep my eBay searches going for the 8110s, but we'll see. Now as a sidebar thing, the other thing that I bought at the start of the pandemic, I remember having a lot of G-Shocks as a kid, and I didn't have one. And I thought, like, as sort of morose as it might be, like, I thought, okay, I need an apocalypse watch. Like, who knows where this is all going to go? I want a watch that I can wear.
600. That's the classic. The
yes.
600. That's my absolute favorite G-Shock. Yeah, and that's what I use for hiking and backpacking, and yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And that the same thing. It's like really light. It's really dependable. I spent, $100 on it. You can wear it everywhere, and you don't care about beating it up. And it actually has quite a bit of like really cool history to it as well. So it's from like a watch collecting standpoint and a watch enthusiast standpoint, it actually has quite a bit of cachet to it. Even though it is just, $100 sort of plastic watch. And I bought like the blacked out one that's got like the black screen. And
I was going to say, if you spent 100, you must've got like a really fancy one.
Yeah, I did. I went overboard with it, but yeah, it's been a nice watch. I find that like a lot of days I end up just wearing it because it's easy and I don't have to think about it. And if I'm going outside to chase my son around and he's playing with sticks and rocks and stuff like that, then, I'm not as worried about whatever I'm wearing. So those are my two Japanese watches at the moment.
Very nice. You could get that in gold, I believe. They have a gold version that's about 10,000 plus.
Oh, nice. I love it.
I believe I believe I heard they were making a solid ruby one as well.
It wouldn't surprise me. They have, when you go on and look, at even just this particular, model, they've got all sorts of colors and all sorts of different iterations of it and stuff. The G-Shock line is huge. If you can't find something in the G-Shock line that something that speaks to you, I'd be very surprised.
So I was going to go ahead and do one more screen share here again. This is going back to the one button Seiko 64 chronograph. So this article here talks about the watch and the 64 Olympics, goes through some of the ads. There's a world time watch and the chronograph, and this gentleman gets this particular one with a really bad bezel and a completely worn out pusher for the chronograph. So he goes through the process of restoration, points out a crack that these tend to get in the case, a stress crack in terms of the pop-off case. And then there's a picture of the movement, and he shows some close-ups of things, but the dial is rather nice, and he goes through the process of tearing it down, cleaning it up, showing some of the issues, and trying to chase down a replacement pusher, which he paid about a quarter of for the pusher than he paid for the whole watch. And then to get a replacement bezel, he finds a new old stock bezel from someplace that's originally in the original packaging, which if I got that, I would probably keep it in the original packaging rather than putting it on the watch. But he paid more for the bezel than he paid for the whole watch. But in the end, he ends up with a nice watch. So if you're interested in looking at what's involved going inside these things, Adventures in Watch Fettling is the website, and I'm not sure what fettling is, but that must be a British term. I'm not familiar with it.
Actually, this guy has a really entertaining blog post on restoring the crown, the Seiko crown seal, where he shows a very creative way that he figured out how to pop off the washer so that he could remove the seal from inside. The way he does it is he jams tons of other washers in through the hole around the around the stem threads. He just keeps jamming more and more and more seals in until it pops the washer out.
Okay.
And like he uses some sort of like a cylinder like that fits to just kind of keep pushing him in and pushing him in and pushing him in, and it pops the washer off in sort of a fairly uniform way so that he doesn't destroy the washer and pulling it off. But anyway, you can find that. That's a very entertaining blog post. I recall that one in particular because I was interested in how that could be done.
Interesting. I would have assumed, I'd get a large crown chuck that would fit it, and I'd put it in a watchmaker's lathe and try and roll the lip back so that the washer would just fall out. And then, of course, once you repack it, you then have to roll the lip back down onto the washer.
Yeah.
I just don't know how easy that is to do. I've never done it.
Yeah, not a lot. They weren't meant to be done, right? It wasn't meant. They were one-time use items. So
yeah, most of us would you assume you get a replacement, and I was going to ask you guys in terms of sources for replacement crystals for like that world timer I have. The crystal is cracked and I don't have a gasket for the back. Do these sites offer?
Have you checked Spencer's
back?
website?
Pardon?
Have you checked Spencer's website for the crystal?
I have not. No.
That's a good starting point for crystals, I think.
So how do you spell it?
Spencer, the watchmaker in Fort Collins.
Okay. Yeah.
Spencer Klein watches or something like that. I just think he's had a lot of those crystals custom made to very good specs, better than the ones from like Thailand, I think, for sure.
Okay, and he sells these to the general public.
Yeah,
he doesn't keep them for himself.
But I think he has to order like huge batches of them, and that would definitely be the first place to look if he has the right. I mean, he's very responsive too if you email him.
Okay, Anthony, you have any sources for parts, or do you do this kind of work yourself as well?
Yeah, it depends what you're looking for. Probably out of Japan is your best chance if you're trying to get new old stock. There's also a number of different companies that made third-party, replacement OEM type crystals for, a whole bunch of the different Seiko models. So yeah, they're out of Japan's probably the easiest way. Gone the Yahoo Japan auctions, probably your best bet if you're trying to find a OEM original unit.
Okay, sounds good. Anybody else got things to show off?
Nope. Quickly show a few things if anyone's interested. Not a bunch of stuff. Yeah, not the easiest. What do we got? Oh, see how this works. Probably not great on camera. No, this is not going to work on camera very well. I will share some photos I've got of things. Probably the easiest way.
Yeah, I don't know if the camera tricks, if it's useful to hold up like a handheld magnifier in front of the and then put the item you're trying to show.
I went and found that blog post on the getting the washer off there. It is indeed kind of an interesting video for anyone who wants to, or an interesting blog post. But anyway.
Yeah. Martin has some interesting stuff on that site. If you're looking for good breakdowns of models and things, it's always worth taking a look at there. So yeah, these are just a couple of my one-button chronos. So single, no date, Bakelite bezel, and the original Beads of Rice bracelet on that one. So it's the 5719. The 5717 is the version with the date. And yeah, that's an example with steel bezel on those as well. And then there's also a steel version of that with a insert that's available. Don't have one of. That's also the original bracelet on that as well. So there's a few different bracelet styles, quite a few different dial types and bezels. So yeah, there's a few different variations that you see when you're looking at the different models there. All right, so this is the first model spring drive that was released. So quite distinctive design, shall we go with? Probably hasn't held up the best in time as far as style goes, but it's an interesting model. So yeah, integrated bracelet, of course. The black dial on that is a Urushi lacquer black dial. So super, super black. Yeah, quite a nice design there. The movement itself is a hand wound spring drive, which they've only just started going back and doing hand wound versions of that. Originally released in '99, was a limited edition that they released at that point in time. So that was one of the first models of the spring drive technology that was released to market.
So does that spring drive model, does that have the electronics in it regulating the little release rotor or whatever they call that thing?
Yeah, so all of the tri-synchro regulator will control essentially the escape wheel. So it has a braking mechanism that it measures the rotation of the wheel and then will apply a magnetic braking to essentially regulate the speed at which the mainspring unwinds, and the watch is controlled that way. So really very similar to a traditional mechanical watch in every way, except instead of having a traditional escapement, it has a spinning rotor that is then slowed down to ensure that it's turning at the correct speed. Yeah, so no batteries or capacitor or anything inside. The rotation of the wheels internally will create a small current. That's just enough to power a crystal to check the timing regulation with. But really the vast majority of the whole gear train is exactly the same as what you would find on a regular mechanical watch. It's really just the escapement that's changed.
It's really a clever design. They spent something like 10 years working on that development or something, you know, the history of that.
Yeah. I can't remember the engineer who originally just started with the project, but yeah, it was, you know, probably almost close to 20 years, I think, in total for the project and moving on with that. So quite a number of different variations and things they went through. Really, a lot of the trouble is getting the electronics down to such a small package and something that's going to use such a small amount of electricity. Obviously, the amount of power that's instantly generated just by the movement of a mechanical movement is somewhat minuscule, to the point where I believe one of the stats Seiko said if every single person on the planet had a spring drive watch operating, all of the power that was generated by all movements at the same time would be enough to maybe power a 40-watt light globe. Like it is, you know, you're talking tiny amounts of energy. So yeah, it is definitely not a quartz traditional watch in any way there. But yeah, this was the original hand-wound version, and then about 4 years later, they came out with a automatic winding version, which is what's most commonly found in the movements these days. Some of the other ones, well, here's a more modern spring drive variation. This is a model that was released for an attempt in 2013 to climb Everest. Miura is the Japanese explorer who did it. At the time, he was the oldest person to climb Mount Everest, and yeah, Seiko sponsored the ascent, and this was a commemorative watch that they produced for that. Design is quite distinctive with its, I don't know, unicorn type look there with the pusher at the top. The reasoning behind that was specifically for climbing. So if you're climbing, you've got ropes and things that will get caught on traditional crowns and things because they're sticking out. So if the rope goes up against your wrist, the large slab edges will just bounce or just have the rope move directly over the top of that. That's the logic behind that. And then, yeah, GMT and lots of lumen and things on that designed, you know, if you're climbing inside caves and stuff where you're not quite sure of what the time is, 24-hour helps you tell, can't see the sun, yeah, easy to lose track of time where you are. So if you're climbing in caves, that's another handy layout there. They make a traditional, just straight stainless version of this. That's not a limited edition. Other models.
That's an attractive watch. I know taste is always subjective, but that's
exactly
a looking watch.
It's an unusual looking watch, but yeah, it's not too bad. It looks okay on the wrist.
Is it huge?
It's not ridiculously huge. So
what's the lug to lug width on that?
Lug to lug. All right, lug to lug is 50, maybe 50 and a half. So, you know, it is a relatively large watch, but yeah, it's not ridiculous on the wrist. It's wearable.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Something else I've recently been playing with and picked up a couple of is the 9A85 quartz models that were released. These were for the anniversary or the 20th anniversary of Seiko quartz. So this is the world's thinnest standalone watch movement at 0.85 mil for the complete movement. So it's, yeah, definitely a very compact movement. They actually stuck them into either a white gold or a yellow gold case, and there was a complete release of 500 units in total for those. So yeah, there's a shot on the wrist to give you some idea of the actual size of the movement. The movement is 1/4 the height of that watch. The watch itself, the case, they decided, let's not do a ridiculously thin watch. Let's actually make it practical for everyday wear. So it's rated to like 30 meters water resistance and things, is thick enough that you're not going to just instantly bend it if you look at it funny, like some models out there. So yeah, it's quite a wearable everyday watch that was designed as, but yeah, the movement itself is kind of crazy as far as the actual thickness of it goes. Don't have a shot of the movement there, but yeah, again, if you look on a website, I've recently done an article on those where you can actually see the movement itself.
I like how you took the photos in front of a contemporary keyboard.
Contemporary keyboard. Oh yeah, that's just my regular. That's my work keyboard.
Yeah, it looks like one of those old school full travel cherry keyboards.
Yeah, it's a IBM 122 key thing. It's nice. I like the clicky noise.
Yeah, I can
One
see
of those. A lot of those ended up in the trash. So,
yeah, it's a shame
before they
because
became valuable.
they are really nice. And yeah, having 122 keys gives you quite a bit of flexibility to program out macros and anything you want to do. Anyway,
you can show it off while you're on your Motorola brick cell phone, yelling at somebody on your Motorola cell phone.
Yeah, it always gets an interesting look when people first come to my desk and see it. It's like, wow, that's a big keyboard. So yeah, it's. I'll see if I can grab this one. It's not the most subtle keyboard in the world. They're quite big.
I love it. It's great.
But yeah, there's mechanical keyboards is another whole weird sub-collection group of people doing stuff. So it's unusual. Other models, I think everyone's probably familiar with that watch there. So that's the original brochure for the Astron. And yeah, there's the watch itself. Yeah.
Is that the same texture that they use now on like the contemporary, what they call like the snowflake Seiko quartz? Is that texture on the case? Is that called something?
No, so the texture on the case, I might have some close-up shots somewhere of that. Yeah. So the actual texture is carved into the surface of the watch. So this one here is a model that was released in 2000. The original model, which is this one here. Let's see if I've got the comparison between. Okay, so very similar sort of style. Dig up, I actually got a comparison of the texturing there. But yeah, they are different between those. And then the new version that was released for the 50th anniversary was quite a bit different as well. There was an anniversary edition that was released. If you have a look at this is the original 35 SQ. You can see it is kind of a series of carvings into that to create the pattern. And then on the 2000 version, it's more just lines that are cut in. So similar sort of overall effect, but a bit different. And then the newer version is, just a series of cuts directly into the surface there. So a bit different finish between all of them. But yeah, the same general concept across everything.
Wow. That's pretty detailed.
Is that a solid gold case?
Yeah, so the Astrons originally, came out in the solid 18 karat gold case. So case, in fact, hands and markers as well and crown are all 18 karat. And that was the only model at launch. And then around 3 years later, they released a stainless steel version of the 35 SQ. That was also available. And then there's also the SQC, which is the calendar version, which has a date, which was released afterwards. But the initial launch Astrons were this model here. So no date and solid 18K case.
And what's the collector price range for these original Astrons and then the reissue?
They've definitely picked up, but they're not super hard to find. I'd expect to pay probably around 15 to 17, depending on condition and if it's running or not. If you're looking at something that's not running, maybe about 10, unless you're sure you can get it fixed. Yeah, you might be better off looking for something that runs because it's a 50-year-old quartz movement. They're not the easiest to find spare parts for. Quite often, if you are trying to get something repaired, you're going to end up buying one of the stainless versions that you can pick up for a couple of grand, and then just pull the movement out of that.
What is the movement like inside? Is it similar to a mechanical watch, like one of the 7-jewel Swiss Rondas, or is it more along the lines of what you'd see?
It's what you would see on a traditional quartz watch. Really, your main difference is it's running at 8 hertz as opposed to the 32 that you'd expect on a regular standard quartz these days. They did release an update to the movement that moved it to 16 hertz. They're more common to find, but the originals were 8.
Yeah, and what's about the starting price for one of those spring drives?
Spring drives, depends on the models you're looking at. I think there's some Prospects models you can pick up for about 3K. And then they go up from there depending on what you're looking at. There's obviously a lot of Grand Seiko models that come with spring drives, and prices for there are all over the place depending on what else you're getting with the watch.
Have you worked on one of those spring drives before?
No, I haven't serviced spring drive. It's, as I said, if you're just dealing with the standard mechanicals of it, it's quite straightforward. It's not going to be much different. But if you're needing to do regulation and stuff on the circuitry, then it would probably need to go back to Seiko for support.
Oh, that's really interesting. I know that, what was it? I like the design of the case. Not much of a fan of anything electronic in my watches, at least. I can appreciate what goes into the spring drives, but definitely not my favorite quartz watch movement. A lot of people say that they're pretty much not quartz watches, but at the end of the day, as someone who works on watches myself, if it's got a piece of electric crystal and it's using electricity, to me, that's a quartz watch. Especially if you tear down like a Ronda or an ETA and you actually service the parts of it, something that has anywhere between 7 to 15 joules inside of it, you could make the argument that that is a mechanical watch, which I mean it's not, but it is definitely something that is very, very close. So to me, quartz watches and spring drive watches sort of fall into about the same category.
Yeah, well, I don't know. See, a quartz watch is powered by a battery. A spring drive is powered by a mainspring.
True, but true, but they're both powered by a quartz regulator.
They're regulated by
it's
quartz.
Regulated. It's not powered.
Yeah, regulated.
But just a different technology out there. An interesting, different. Essentially, think of it as different type of escapement. Probably the easiest way to understand what it is.
Yeah, I think I seem to be the only person who doesn't like spring drive watches, I think.
It's plenty of choices for everybody. No one says you have to like everything.
Yeah, I can
plenty
appreciate...
Plenty of people like, the actual Grand Seiko quartz. If you want a nice hand constructed quartz watch, then you can't go past it. But, some people have issues with quartz. Other people don't really care. Depends. There's definitely a lot of difference between a 9F quartz and a $2 quartz that you find at a supermarket. There's a lot of difference in construction and the way it is. So it's just a different market for people to look at.
And the thing with high-end quartz is the stability of the quartz crystal. A lot of the low-end watches and timekeepers are using resonators that aren't particularly thermally stable, but they're high enough frequency that they get you within seconds a day. But the super high accuracy movements like the Citizen movement that's used in the Bull of a Precisionist are quite remarkable in their ability to regulate the quartz oscillations. Anthony, tell us what your favorite vintage Japanese watch lines or watch models. You got any that you want to share with us?
Geez. Thing with Seiko is there's so wide a breadth of all sorts of stuff. If you like sports watches, if you like divers, if you like chronographs, if you like dress watches, there's a whole wide range of choices in everything. And they've made so many models for so many years. You're talking probably easily high hundreds of thousands of different models. So, just understanding the breadth of the range is quite surprising. I'm always looking for just weird stuff, I guess, I enjoy. So things like the hand wound quartz, which is always a bit strange, that you don't see.
No Seiko 5s in your favorites?
Yeah. Maybe not 5s in my favorites. Probably the 6139 would be one of my favorite 5s, I'd say. So yeah, first automatic chronograph there. I've got a February 69 version of those. But yeah, the earliest dated ones I've seen, cases marked in January. There's a whole bunch of interesting models there in the range and lineup. Yeah, there's not a huge amount in the series that I would consider my favorite watches. There's tons of models that I do really appreciate in the Seiko 5 lineup. But yeah, they've always been a model that's designed to be general, everyday wearing watch, really cost effective and do great at what they do. And there's a whole bunch of really distinctive designs and things. And yeah, a whole bunch that I enjoy, but yeah, probably not in my top models. So yeah, I'd say 6139 would be my favorite in the 5 lineup, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot to like in that whole range there, especially the 70s models, I think are probably the most interesting in the Seiko 5s.
What about non-Seiko Japanese brands and manufacturers? Anything?
Yeah, Citizen's probably the obvious choice as well. They again have a whole range of different models that are quite interesting, whole range of different technologies, stuff there. Finding parts and things is a little more difficult for Citizen. They're not as well documented, so yeah, quite difficult there. But yeah, they also have a whole range of stuff from exciting LCD models, some of the early ones there. Yeah, as I said, the Eco Drive range is really good. Obviously, their new 0010 movement, which is rated at 1 second a year, is quite an impressive piece of technology. Yeah, there's nothing that's particularly close as far as accuracy goes at the moment there. On the Seiko side, you're looking at 5 seconds a year annual, as opposed to the 1 second a year. So yeah, that was quite a leap up in performance on the Citizen side. But yeah, they have some nice chronographs. Not sure I've got a model there. So yeah, this is a similar kind of era to the Seiko 5 mechanical models. This is a Walter Wolf chronograph from Citizen, standard kind of mechanical chronograph, no particularly unusual features about it. This was designed for a sales item for Walter Wolf Racing, which was a Formula One team back in the 80s from memory. So they released a couple of different models for that. Yeah, titanium case, nice design, one of my enjoyable Citizen models there. A fun kind of mechanical movement on the Citizens there. One of the other Citizen mechanicals that I enjoy, they made a series of challenge golf models. So the model itself is a regular standard dress watch. At the top, there's a score counter. So you can advance the score by pressing the crown when it's in the vertical position. If you rotate your wrist away from yourself, essentially inverting the watch, if you push the crown in, it'll actually reduce the score. So as you play along, you can tell how far plus or minus you are on par as you go through. So yeah, just an unusual complication there. So regular date in the bottom corner there. But yeah, this is operated by pressing the crown on the side of the watch, and there's a few different variations that are available for that. But yeah, just a kind of strange complication. I said I'm quite drawn to just weird stuff, and yeah, having a watch with a built-in counter is quite weird. Citizen used that sort of operation for the date mechanism in a number of their watches as well. On the day-date models, on some calibers, to advance the date, you can press the button in, and to advance the day, you can actually push or rotate it so the watch is inverted, and then when you push that, it'll operate the day wheel. So alternates inside to toggle between the two things that you're changing. Similar way on a traditional movement, you'll pull it out to the first position and rotate one direction to change day and the other direction to change the date. Yeah, this just does it through pushes through the crown. So there's a few things Citizen's done that are quite interesting that you don't see too often on other brands.
In terms of case construction, materials, and the such, was Citizen and Seiko on kind of the same level of quality, or was Seiko a bit higher?
In general, because both brands have such a wide range of product, you can definitely find Citizen models that are much higher specs than Seiko models. But in general, both top of the range if you're comparing them. I'd say the Seiko models are a bit better finished in case design and things. So especially as you move into the 70s and 80s, their high-end models, case finishing is somewhat incredible on those, to the point you don't, even today, you only see comparable stuff if you're lucky. Yeah, just the level of polishing and the angles and things that were available on the cases on the Seikos were probably a bit better. Citizen, yeah, also did a whole range of interesting materials. You know, they were the first people to produce a titanium watch. So that was obviously quite a big advance. But yeah, they also had quite a whole range of different black coatings and different materials that they utilized on other models. So you'd see some wood used, stone, a whole range of different materials used on Citizen models. Not as adventurous on material choice on the Seiko side as a general statement, I'd say. But again, both of them did all sorts of stuff. You know, you'd see stone dials and precious materials used on both. Seiko on the high end, more jewelry style, size materials happening, to the point where one of their Creedor models has the actual watch crystal was a diamond. So yeah, it's quite a large diamond, of course. So yeah, there's a whole range of different things. But yeah, for gem setting and stuff, Seiko has a group dedicated to that. You don't see that as much really at all on the Citizen side.
I asked the question on the quality because I was part of that Citizen dive tester. I was looking at what Citizen watches, dive watches would have used something like that or required a depth rating. And you look at some of the vintage Citizen dive watches and the bezels are pretty beat up. They look like they're basic anodized aluminum, not particularly hard, and close-ups of like the top of the 12 o'clock pip isn't always printed centered right on the luminous dot and such. So I was kind of wondering if Citizen was a little lower in terms of manufacturing standards, or if I was just, you know, again, it's the price point.
Yeah, I think it's probably generally the price point. And you know, lots of those older models were just used as straight up tool watches. You know, the people are buying them for a specific reason. So yeah, they do get really trashed. But yeah, they're equivalent in a lot of ways. Citizen made some nice 800-meter divers and things that were available. And yeah, the quality on those is excellent, as you would sort of expect. But again, yeah, they're high-end models, very good quality. You know, this sort of SKX 007 type target level market. Yeah, you'll see quite a lot of Citizens as well around there. And of course, just like the Seikos, they're pretty heavily beaten up, and you know, people don't worry too much about those. They take them to the beach and sand smashes up against the bezel and it all gets trashed, and you see it on the Seikos as well. But yeah, at that lower price point, yeah, hard work, either of them doesn't stand up particularly well over time.
Any other Japanese brands, Orient, Ricoh, that made tool watches that the young collectors would be all excited about?
Yeah, there's some Ricoh divers that are quite interesting, quite rare, definitely not cheap, and bordering on impossible to find spare parts for. But yeah, if you search for some of the couple of models of Ricoh divers that you see out there, I think it was a 300 meter and either 800 or 1000 meter that they did as well. So yeah, quite nice models there. Again, collectible in good condition, but not particularly easy to find. Orient did a whole range of divers as well. There's an Orient 1000 meter mechanical that you see quite a bit. That's actually uses a case that was also used by a number of Swiss manufacturers. So it wasn't a case that they designed themselves. But again, not super cheap, not particularly rare, but finding something in good condition isn't the easiest. But yeah, Ricoh's said sort of disappeared. They originally came from a brand called Takano, which was mainly dress watches. And then they sort of folded up and turned into Ricoh in the late 50s, early 60s. I can't remember the exact date there. But yeah, Orient's continued on as an independent brand and eventually was purchased a few years ago by Epson, as we said. So yeah, some interesting stuff from all of those. But yeah, Citizen, Seiko, and Orient would be your three main brands if you're looking at Japanese stuff. And you're looking for mechanical and stuff. If you want to throw in digital and quartz, then Casio is obviously another big player.
Casio are metal watches. They do some analog displays and stuff, but a lot of what I'm associated with are plastic. But did they do heavy metal kinds of things?
Yeah, they've done a few, but market-wise, G-Shock is probably the most prominent for the brand. Not too much high-end models outside of G-Shock that you see internationally. In a Japanese market, there's a few ranges that they have. It's branded under Oceanus or something similar to that. And yeah, they're quite nice, kind of mid-range type model watches, but just, yeah, all quartz models, not really any focus on mechanical from that side of the company. That's not where their specialization lies at all.
Excellent. Anybody else got questions for Anthony? I've been kind of dominating this conversation.
To have a look, going back to the marine chronometer, yeah, that's one of the models that you can see in the Seiko Museum. It's, yeah, pretty much a straight copy of the Ulysses Nardin, as you said. But yeah, big fusee chain and things you can see down the bottom there. And yeah, there's the case that they came in, and yeah, they were gyro stabilized in a lot of designs and cases there. After the war, I don't believe they produced anything in the mechanical again. And then from then on, the quartz models is what they've put forward for marine chronometers. So the model that was originally designed for the 64 Olympics for timing became adapted as a marine chronometer and moved on to there. They've made a few of those different models over the last probably up until about the 90s, I believe.
With that particular marine chronometer you have shown, I'm not aware if they continued to build that after their original factory was bombed when they rebuilt, whether or not they continued manufacturing on that. And I don't know if there's some way to look up your serial number to know when it was made.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the serial number on those. My guess is just statistically, early 40s would be where almost all of the ones that you find are going to be made. The example you have where it's just got Seiko written on a dial as opposed to Seikosha definitely indicates it's the 40s. So yeah, my guess would be somewhere around the 42, 43, this sort of period for that example.
What else? Clockwise, are you a collector of Seiko clocks? Are there mechanical ones that you see out there? All we're familiar with are primarily the quartz consumer stuff.
Yeah, let me grab something. So yeah, Seiko has a whole range of clocks. So there's something similar to that, which is somewhat common. That's a 30-day with a calendar. So you can see at the bottom there, it shows the day and date. And then yeah, regular chiming mechanism and stuff there. So really a whole range of different clock models, from mechanical type stuff. You know, they made alarm clocks and desk clocks and wall clocks and, you know, pretty much pick a clock type. There's ones available there. You know, there's little small mechanical desktop like things. So yeah, a whole range of things there. Citizen also have a range of clocks. So things like, you know, world time clock, lots of styles there. Seiko also similar ones as well. So yeah, a whole range of different choices. These days, Seiko do a whole bunch of models that are also GPS synced. So the model I've got up on the wall there is tied to GPS. So work anywhere in the world, and you just put in the time and away it goes. There's also a setting where you can go in and say daylight saving starts on this date and ends on this date. So, you know, it's the third Sunday in whatever month or whatever. So it'll automatically adjust itself for daylight saving and things as well. So I don't know, nice, handy if you need a accurate reference clock, then yeah, works well. You can put them inside. They don't need to be, you know, now external antenna and things. They work up to about 20 meters from a window and things. So designed for factory floors and areas where you can't get a radio signal to sync in Japan, and then in countries where you don't have radio sync. So yeah, work well.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. We are going on 2.5 hours from the start of the recording. Are we wanting to continue? We have more to talk about with folks. Anybody can speak up or do something in the chat. Mark, Ian, Omaha, you're muted, but are you a Seiko collector? Or?
Well, actually, I came from Japan to America about 50 years ago, and right now I have some Seikos, but I'm collecting like Hamilton military watches.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What you're collecting?
Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton?
Military watches.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm familiar with Seikos. I wonder if anybody is watch repair people here. I made a few watch movements and some watch tools, and I entered NAWCC a few years ago, and I got the award for those.
So you said you actually have been making some movements by hand?
Well, let's see. I think about 5 years ago or so, I made 3 watch movements, and I entered NAWCC contest, and I won those awards.
Wow! Congratulations! I'm impressed.
So I made everything except rubies, hairspring, and mainspring. So everything else was handmade. Even cutters, I made cutters.
So you made your own tool?
Oh yeah. If you have minutes, I can just show you. Are you guys familiar with the timing? Like gravity, like when change positions, time changes.
Positional errors.
Yeah, also hairspring, expand and shrink in different ways, and change timing. When the mainspring is full and the mainspring gets weaker, if it's just a hairspring, a flat hairspring expand this way and shrink this way, and create the same. Yeah.
So you had to do the overcoiling and all of that kind of stuff as well?
Oh yeah. I had a flat hairspring, and I have to basically made an overcoil. Yeah.
Yeah, do the Breguet overcoil.
Oh yeah, Breguet, yes.
Did you use a specific pattern for that, or?
Well, basically I had a flat hairspring and made overcoil. So if you have a few minutes, you guys talk about something else, and I'm going to bring a couple of tools. And I can show you just a moment.
Yeah, the for patterns for doing overcoiling and hairspring work, if the Bulova School of Watchmaking book, which was published a long time ago, but is in reprint, it's got some pages on dealing with hairsprings and doing overcoils and those sorts of things. So it's a good reference for such madness.
Yeah, do you know what material they're typically made out of? Because I'd heard multiple opinions on that.
Hairsprings?
Yeah.
There's lots of different materials. Anthony mentions in his article on the mechanical wristwatch chronometry trials that Seiko first entered in, their hairsprings got slightly magnetized and they didn't do so well. And so they used a non-magnetic material, I believe, eventually for the hairsprings.
Yeah, I believe internationally there's not that many companies that actually make hairsprings and mainsprings even. It's very specific steels that you normally use. Seiko use their own alloys and things, so they manufacture their own hairsprings. But my understanding is pretty much all the Swiss manufacturers utilize this, just a couple of different manufacturers for the springs themselves, but he's quite specialized.
If you are interested in making a watch, I don't know if you can see this or not. Yeah, good.
Very nice.
This is the 16 size pocket watch I made. And also made hands. You see, this is the. I don't know if you can see this or not.
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, this is the movement back and the front. And let's see. I have to make like opinions. Let's see, right here.
That's the pinion cutting.
Just a minute, I cannot hear you. Most difficult one is palette.
Oh, the palette fork, like putting the jewels and
because of like gears pinions, if you make one right cutters, you can just cut it mechanically. But palette is very, very difficult. Basically, last finish, we have to use hand. And that palette is very difficult.
Yeah.
So that channel where you put the palette jewels must be cut manually.
Yeah, yeah, right here.
Yeah. Oh, that must be really precise.
Yeah,
to get
you have to use a file. Okay, to cut gears. Gears. I don't know if it's maybe you cannot see it. Right here. So you have to make cutters. Cut gears this way.
Wow. Okay. So, did you have any previous watchmaking experience before starting this?
Actually, before I came to United States, I took certified master watchmakers examination in Japan. I took highest score and I was the youngest CMW in Japan.
Wow. Okay. And how long did it take you to make the movement?
Okay, so this is another one. I made a few others. So I'm going to show you. I wasn't expecting to speak today, but most collectors they're not interested in making watches. Let's see. And making watches like 1/3 is planning, and 1/3 is making tools, and 1/3 is physically, making watches. Yeah. Well, I don't know what do you want to see, but made a few watches, and so I'm gonna show you. If you are interested in balance or especially hairspring adjustment, this is the hairspring. I made this too. Okay. Take a look at this blue part, flat hairspring. This. We can put hold hairspring right here. Let's see, right here. We can twist this left and right to see. I don't know if you can see this or not. This thing hold the hairspring. And we can see twist this knob to open hairspring and close it. Expand, shrink, to make. That's the way we can see if hairspring overcoil is made it right. Expand evenly, shrink evenly.
Yep.
Yeah. if you have this tool, we can see twist this knob here, right here. Hairspring hair corrector right goes here. From here, from the top, we can see if hairspring is evenly shrinking or expanding. Without taking out, hairspring from a balance, you can just adjust it.
Okay, and when you add the hairspring back to the balance, there is not much variation that happens in the process?
Okay, to check that, basically, they have so many different curves to make it, shrink and expand evenly. Mm-hmm. But if your hairspring is, if you have to make a hair overcoil from a flat hairspring, you have to try it so many times to make it, right. If it's in a balance, if it's in a balance wheel, and if it's in a watch movement, you have to take out everything out, and then you have to fix it. You see. If this tool, you don't have to do it. You can just change the height. Actually, it comes up. Let's see. Actually, we can hold hairspring outside from this, and because we can make it for larger hairspring, we can move it out. For smaller spring, you can make it inside. Mm-hmm. Yep. Also, this knob right here, for a smaller collet, if it's smaller collet, you can use smaller this right here, and if we hairspring collet larger, you can twist it in. You can use thicker parts right here. See?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's adjustment. So this is for hairspring, just overcoil outside hairspring. Mm-hmm. Adjustment. Okay. So inside, made one like this. I'm sure that many of them you are familiar with this thing here.
Yep.
That's some really nice tooling that you've made, Mark.
Oh, thank you. So, let's see. So we can. Then we can see, move this around. Position, and we can see, basically this for inner.
Uh-huh.
And also it has a...
So Mark, when you graduated from watchmaking school, did you work for one of the big brands?
No, I didn't go to watch school. I just read a book, and also my father was a certified master watchmaker, so I learned from him, but basically I didn't go to school. Just basically read a lot of books, and just everything, it was my own. So you can see that this needle here. Also, you can adjust outside the curve, and also we have to make internal curve to reduce this standing position, for gravity difference for hairspring inside. So we have to make an internal curve. Internal curve is just like a overcoil.
Right.
Yeah. So with this needle, and we can make that internal curve easily. Yeah.
Yeah, very impressive tools.
So you submitted this in like 2015, your watches?
No. Let's say I submitted 2000, gosh, I think 2000, 2015, I guess, I submitted 3 tools and 1 watch. And just a minute. 2014, I submitted 1 watch movement. 2015, I took my watch movement and the tools. And 2017, I took a movement and the tools. So all got award, everything got award. They were totally different from these kinds of tools.
Well, that's very impressive. I was wondering if I looked at the NAWCC website or in any of their bulletins from that time frame showing the crafts competition, if we would see any of your work.
I think it shows few pictures. Award, like watch movement, first, and the watch tools, first, second, third. It shows pictures.
Okay.
I think it was 2014, 15, and 2017, I think.
Okay, we'll definitely go check it out. Thank you for sharing. That was fantastic.
I don't do any advertising. I don't do anything. Just I'm, staying little time America. Just occasionally, join this meeting. But I'd like to share something with the people, but most people just collect watches. People are not interested in these tools.
It's definitely interesting to see how it's made. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's okay. I've been wanting to make watches for a while. I just got George Daniels' book of watchmaking, and I keep saying I'm going to work my way through it. I am sort of building up my tool collection. I've almost got my horological lathe running, and I've been looking into some other various mini lathes for case making and some other things. But I had been wondering, what kind of lathe do you use?
Okay, I think I have a 4 8mm WW lathe. One is Arrow, which is Japanese company, and another one is Gem, which is Japanese company. And I have 2 Morrissey Paris. Paris. I have 2 of those, but also I have a Charline milling and Charline lathe, basically to make tools and some big parts. Charline is okay for maybe clock repair, but not good enough for watch making. But it's very useful that it's nice to have a Charline lathe and milling equipment. But let's see, I think I might have some pictures. Okay, right here. I have, see, where's my finger? I don't know if you can see this or not.
Yep.
This is a 40 centimeter Arrow 8mm WW lathe, and it comes with using milling, attached to milling right here. It's good enough to use a watchmaker's lathe if you just want to make one watches. But if you want to mass produce, you have to buy a very expensive better lathe. But it's a good idea to start from make one watch first. Then if you do, then if you can make it, then you can expand to make more different watches.
Yeah.
Are you going to be making more watches movements?
Well, I'm thinking that, but I haven't done anything for last few years. That kind of tired of making watches because same thing, just shape or maybe size might be different. But I was thinking about maybe making clocks.
Sounds good. You have a lot of skills. Yeah, it's very impressive to see what you've done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
An inspiration for all of us wannabe watchmakers that have, as you can see, lots of stuff behind us, but some of us don't really get to a whole lot of it in the long run.
Well, if anybody is like a professional, you have to have a best equipment you can afford. But like me, hobby, just buy good enough equipment, but I never saw like a Chinese lathe, 8mm lathe. Some of them come with, milling attachment. I'm wondering how good they are. Anybody know how good those Chinese watchmaking lathe?
I really don't. I don't know what the quality is like. I mean, I would, if they're ball bearings, then, ball bearings come in all kinds of different accuracies and runouts. If they're hard conical bearing surfaces, you would think that they could maybe be pretty good, but I really don't know.
Yeah, and I imagine that you could probably swap out or customize the bearings as well. I've heard of people doing that. And I would imagine that the motor would be a little less reliable. I mean, I'm not one to talk. There are some, the Chinese, I'd say it's hit or miss. And I'd say either you'll get a fantastic motor or you'll get a bad motor. If I had to guess, I would say if you looked for one that was reputable from, people who were saying this is a good lathe and they're clearly not just copy pasted. If you can get your hands on a good one and maybe make some modifications, I'd say you probably be pretty much set if you knew what you were doing.
Its price is so attractive, like $1,000 for everything. But I heard that another one, good one is let's see, in a British lathe, cannot remember the name of it. British company make a nice lathe. Generally speaking, Boulder, Roach, Levin, they are very excellent lathe, especially F2, F1, yeah, Boulder series, F series, they are, fine lathe.
Just anecdotal comments I've heard from people is generally the Chinese stuff is okay for larger style stuff. So if you're making clock level size components, it's probably okay. But yeah, for really small stuff, I haven't heard particularly good things about them. Generally for the same price point, you're better off trying to find a second-hand one and get something there. Even if it's 30 years old, it's a good quality 30-year-old model second-hand for the same price as a new Chinese one is probably going to get you better deal. Yeah, I've heard a lot of variation between consistency on those Chinese models. But yeah, if you're just starting off and you want some basic stuff to make some clock parts, it may be okay, but it's also quite possible it's not going to be any good. So yeah, lots of people seem to have them for just basic initial tooling, but if you want to do anything fine,
but beginners, I guess.
Yeah, probably beginners, and then then you find out how inaccurate it is, and people can upgrade parts and make their own parts and move on with those. But generally, you're probably better off trying to find something secondhand if you can. Yeah, often for the same sort of price, you can get something that it's not brand new, but it's also a lot more reliable and just better build quality and tolerance.
Well, I don't know. I think I don't want to spend any more money for buying tools, but
I think if you had 4 lathes, you got enough.
Yeah, for the 8mm and 1 Sharan, Sharan is it was very inexpensive lathe, but not for professional, like hobbyist, like me. It's okay to make maybe some tools. Basically, so these tools, you can see knurling, even this small knurling.
Yes.
This tool is basically, most of parts are made by Sharan too, except maybe this shaft. Need accuracy, so I have to use a regular watchmaker's lathe for this.
We are going on over 3 hours at this point.
Yeah.
For recording. It's
yeah, you can just I'm not gonna have anything like this, but I might gonna publish something in the NAWCC book, but I'm not sure, but I guess someday I think I'm going to publish something for tool making or watchmaking. So maybe I can inspire some, younger people to make watches. So
yeah, I would love to sometime have you show us, more details with pictures and screen sharing on what you've done and the steps you've gone through to build your watches. It's a great journey to share.
Yeah, maybe I'd like to do it someday, and I let you know if I do something.
That would be great. That would be great.
Okay.
We'd love to see it. Anthony, thank you for joining us. That you have really made
it was
this
fun.
this
Thank you very much.
episode. Yeah, your website's remarkable.
Could you put a link to it so I can find it?
Yeah, so I'll throw it in the chat, but yeah, no problem. All right, no, excellent. My workday's started about 10 minutes ago, so I probably should actually do something. But no, thank you very much. It was good to chat to everybody, and yeah, enjoy the rest. And yeah, thank you very much for Mark for sharing. That was excellent to see and very impressive.
Yeah, you have a nice Seiko watches.
Thank you very much.
By the way, we call that 1964 crown chronograph. In Japan we call that one push chrono. Push chrono in Japan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, crown chronograph is definitely a favorite for many people.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
all
you.
right.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you, gentlemen. It's been great. Appreciate
Great.
all the contributions. Thank you again.